Well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us for our Talent Tuesday. Today, we're super excited for our event today. We have a wonderful speaker, Ariana Friedlander, who's a Master's of Public Administration. She's the founder and principal consultant of Rosabella Consulting, where she helps mission-driven organizations build strong leaders, healthier workplace cultures, and high-performing teams. With more than 20 years of experience in leadership development, facilitation, coaching, and conflict resolution, Ariana works with nonprofits, government agencies, higher education, libraries, and businesses to improve communication, strengthen accountability, and navigate change with confidence. I love that. Ariana is a TEDx speaker, a certified conversational intelligence coach, a heart math certified coach, and a somatic practitioner. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Psychology Today, and Girl Boss. She is passionate about helping leaders create workplaces where people and performance thrive together. So, Ariana, welcome. We have a few
Hi,
more
thanks.
to admit. Yay. Let me screen share with you. Let me get out and screen share with you then.
Thanks. Yeah, welcome everybody. It's nice to see folks this morning.
Am I
Um,
out? No?
let's see. Can people see my screen that encourages everyone to introduce themselves in the chat? I always love to see who's in the room. It helps me to understand the perspectives that folks are bringing. So if you can include your name, the position you're in, an organization you're with, and what's something you appreciate about this time of year, that would be great. I was just telling Yvonne, one of the things I appreciate is that school's in session. And even with the early release heat days, it's just like, oh, this is so nice. I feel more space. I feel like my brain just, gained a few IQ points by not having to manage a kiddo home for the summer anymore. So would love to see from all of you. And as we're getting started this morning, I'm going to be talking about performance under pressure. And we're going to go over a specific framework that I use. And this training is typically 3 hours long or more. So I am condensing it for the first time ever into an hour. So bear with me. I'll be doing my best to be comprehensive and complete with you all and not get too dorky on you because I do nerd out about all of this stuff. So I see there's a lot of chats coming in, which is great to see folks are with a variety of different organizations. So this is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I see different things that people appreciate about this time of year too. So yay, thank you for sharing a little bit more about yourselves. And all right, so let's see. I'm gonna have to move the chat. I couldn't X out. All right, so we're here to talk about why do capable people avoid follow through, go quiet in hard conversations, resist change, or get defensive when feedback is offered. Has any of you ever encountered this? Super capable people, and suddenly you're like, what happened? Where did you go? Well, the answer is really, really simple. It's stress. But it's not really just stress itself. It's what happens because the stress is too much, it's too overwhelming, or it's too similar to something that was too much and too overwhelming in the past. And so it overloads the nervous system. And this isn't about lowering the bar, right? I'm not saying, oh, people are under too much stress, expect less. No. It's about understanding what is happening on a human level. And to help us understand that, we're going to go over the 4 R's of trauma-informed leadership. This is just a very human experience that we're all navigating in this day and age. And I know post-COVID, I keep hearing how people's stressors are higher, reactivity is increasing. There's just a lot of intensity people are navigating and a lot of uncertainty that we're all trying to plan our way through. All right, and so we really just want to understand what is getting in the way of the bar being met. And the trauma-informed leadership framework I'm sharing with you is adapted from Shamsa's framework. This is a mental health framework is where it started in providing appropriate care in the mental health. This isn't clinical though. We're not here to diagnose people or to label people. We're just understanding what is happening in people's bodies and minds that is causing this disconnect between you're capable and you're not performing like I expect. And so we're going to go through the 4 R's of realize, recognize, respond, and resist re-traumatizing. And we're going to start with developing trauma literacy, with realizing what's going on. So trauma is something that a lot of people think like, oh, war and famine, and it's something that doesn't happen to me. What we understand now is that trauma is actually really widespread, that 90% of US adults report some trauma exposure, and that it's not about the event per se, it's about how the event overwhelmed the nervous system, and the nervous system rewired because of it. So our bodies reacted to the event, we were overwhelmed. It could be repeated exposure to things like racism, bigotry, sexism, bullying, and it could be that one-time intense event. In either instance, the neurophysiology of the body changes to protect the person moving forward. And so what happens is something can be similar to a past event. Maybe being bullied as a kid in school is being brought up in the workplace. Someone might not be bullying them, but there was a trigger by a word that was said, or a phrase, or a look that they were given. And suddenly they're in this highly reactive place. And what happens is that leads to this stress reaction or overreaction because there's the perception of a threat. So when we perceive a threat and we aren't able to regulate our brains and our neurophysiology in that moment, we become eye-centric. The primitive brain is running the show. And the primitive brain manages our autonomic nervous system. It keeps us alive. That's its main goal in life. But it's not really good at navigating complex situations. And oftentimes when we perceive a threat, our safety isn't really in danger. Like our life isn't really in danger. We just perceive that and react accordingly. Whereas when we feel safe, the executive brain is engaged. And the executive brain has our higher level rational thinking skills. It's where we're capable of empathizing with other people. We're able to navigate uncertainty and complexity and see things from different points of view. And so when we feel that threat, that reactivity, it's the primitive brain. And when we feel safe, it's the executive brain. And a trauma-informed leader can see there's this distinction in how people are showing up because there's these past things. We're not here to diagnose. We're not here to label. We're just here to recognize there is a pattern being played out. And we want to do our best to shift people from the eye-centric primitive brain that's not doing a great job of actually protecting them into their executive brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that's going to look like. And I want to invite too, because I'm condensing everything from a 3-hour workshop into 1 hour, that if there's questions that you have as I'm going through it, please feel free to put them in the chat. And Yvonne can let me know, hey, Ariana, there's a question about this. People were wondering. And I will do my best to keep us on time and answer questions in real time because we are going over a lot and I don't want to overwhelm you too much. So this is the part of realizing trauma happens. It's a normal response. It's when our stress reactions go on hyperdrive. So it's just like this hyperdrive of like stress reactions, perceiving threats and reacting to them. Now, how do you recognize when this is happening? There's some specific signs that we can look for. And I'm curious if anyone here has ever felt stuck in a loop with colleagues or customers at work, maybe in a conversation with a coworker or a boss. People ever feel stuck in a loop? You can like give me a thumbs up. Yeah. We all do at different times, right? And that is the first sign that there's a trauma reaction going or a stress reaction going. So this is a tool I use a lot. It's so super duper helpful. It's called the trigger reaction loop. So it starts with the trigger, right? Something happens, a stimuli happens that causes the release of stress hormones that leads to a physiological response in the body, physical sensations. This all happens like instantaneous, right? So The trigger could be, I saw in a retreat I was leading once, someone said, we need to table this, and a participant started yelling. Right? The trigger was that phrase, table this, because to that individual, his past experience showed table this meant you don't matter, I don't care what you have to say, I'm never going to deal with this again. And that wasn't the intention of the leader when she said that, but that was how he reacted. So we go into these physiological responses, hands sweating, kind of like mine right now because I'm standing here talking to you all. Heart racing, heat rising, sinking feeling in your stomach, a buzzing sensation. There's all of these physiological responses. And then we start making meaning of those sensations in our bodies. We have thoughts and we have stories, and they often reinforce our past experiences because our brains are these amazing predictive pattern making machines. So we're, hearing the words table this, we're feeling this, and going into a threat reaction is what happened, right? He started yelling. And that, of course, then keeps the loop going because the behavior is another trigger. And we just go round and around and around in these different loops. And I saw this early in my career when I was leading a change initiative, and someone that was responsible, I needed her to support this change initiative. We were implementing a database system. I was responsible for designing it. I'm not a technician. It was kind of funny how I landed there. And she just kept avoiding the work. She would not give me the material I had asked for. She wouldn't follow through on anything. She would miss meetings. She would miss deadlines. And the more she did that, the more angry I got. And so we were stuck in this combination of she was in flight and I was in fight. So there's 4 primary threat reactions. And they show up differently in work. So fight shows up as someone getting argumentative or defensive. In my case, I was getting super pushy. I was pushing harder and harder. The more she avoided me, the harder I pushed, and the more she avoided me. It was just round and round we went, right? And I did try to exert power over her, but I didn't have any. So it was a very clumsy situation, right? When you might see someone their tone of voice gets very aggressive, their behavior gets aggressive. Maybe they take an intimidating stance if they're in fight. It might be the person that others feel like they have to walk on eggshells around. You don't want to upset Sam because, he'll react really strongly. He'll overreact. So people might feel like they have to walk around eggshells. That's a sign that there's a fight reaction online. Signs that there's a flight reaction is that avoidance, right? It's the person that is avoiding the hard conversation, avoiding the challenging project. It also can look like overworking. It can look like someone that refuses to delegate, that does things themselves instead of asking for help. That's another flight reaction when you're I'm just not going to do this. Excessive worry and perfectionism, someone that can't ship their product, can't ship what they're working on. They're constantly in refinement, right? That is another sign of a flight reaction. Then there's freeze. That's the person that just suddenly can't find their words, can't get their thinking is really clear. They might sound incredibly incoherent. There might be a situation where there was an accident on the floor in the workplace, and that person was trained in what to do in this type of accident, and they don't know what to do. Suddenly they just forget everything. They don't know where the supply closet is. They don't know where the PPE is. They're just lost, deer in the headlights. That's a freeze reaction. And then there's the appeasing, and this is actually the most difficult to spot in people because those are the people pleasers that say yes to your face and then go off and do something completely different. And you're gosh, I thought that we were gonna, we had an agreement, we had this great conversation, they were saying yes, but they weren't actually committed. They didn't actually follow through. I find it's really easy to see appease when someone gives super short answers. Especially if you're in a conversation, they're responding. It's very conversational, and all of a sudden they're, yep, sounds good. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's like, oh, something shifted. A switch was flipped there. So that is the sign of appease. Also, if they're that person that won't take initiative because they're afraid of what other people are going to think and they don't want to upset anyone, that's someone that's also stuck in appease. They're overthinking other people's needs. They're anticipating reactions. So,
So Ariana, Kelsey made a comment in the chat and said, I remember my therapist saying, you can't choose your threat reaction. It was empowering to learn that.
yes, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, they happen automatically. And what I find is that we might have one that is predominantly present in certain types of situations, or especially in the workplace, where it's like, and I invite folks to reflect on, oh, is there one that you see predominantly present in yourself or in someone in the workplace right now, and what that is? And it's important to recognize that we all exhibit these in different scenarios. So it's not like I always go into fight. I have moments of freeze and appease and flight. Like, it's very situation dependent. But I have become aware that I tend to have this, when someone else goes into flight, I go into fight. It's an interesting pattern I'm becoming aware of in myself. That it's like, oh, if I want to shift the dynamics in this situation, I have to choose how I'm showing up first. I can't control the other person, but I can be mindful of not bringing my fight onto line or regulating. Right? Because when we are in these threat reactions, we're dysregulated. So the nervous system is in this high activation level and dysregulation. We can be activated and regulated. That is exactly how, elite athletes perform. You don't get to the Olympics without being able to regulate the activation. You need that. That's what makes you go. That's what gives you the energy to do the uneven bars or the floor exercise or the biking or all the different things that happen in those different settings. So, yeah. Anyone able to see the threat reaction at play in a dynamics or interaction that they've been having? You can type it in the chat. Especially if you can see a certain pressure. And driving is a great example. If you're like, this is hard to think about, because we're just inviting awareness and it might take time, and that's normal. But driving is one that can be pretty easy to see. Most of us tend to have certain threat reactions we go into when someone does something when we're driving that upsets us. Yeah.
There are some comments there. I used to tend to be more in the flight format, and the older I get, the more I turn to the fight response. That's from Ashley. Kelsey said, oh yeah, I'm a crier, which can be so frustrating sometimes, which is why it was cool to hear you can't choose this. Appease and freeze are my most common for me. Anaya said, I used to find myself trying to avoid sending someone into a flight or fight response and ended up appeasing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so we want to avoid other people's reactions. That's a big hallmark of appease, for sure. And it's also interesting to note that you can shift, right? Like, oh, I used to avoid and now I'm going in for the fight more. We do kind of shift with age and experience, and also just finding our voices. The more we're able to recognize, I have my own thoughts and opinions and feelings about this, and I'm going to share that. Sometimes when we learn to be assertive, we can go into fight. And it's all part of the process. And the good news here is that we have neuroplasticity in our brains. So none of us are stuck in this. Our brains can shift. And as leaders, we can choose different ways of responding. I see we also have another response tends to be flight, however, if completely overwhelmed, shuts down. Yeah, and freeze. And freeze is something my system is very, 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 very familiar with. My system goes into freeze a lot. and very easily. And so there's little things that we can do for freeze that are really important for us. And it can start like with swaying, just like soft and subtle movements, or music, or going for a walk. But sometimes like that, even just going for a walk is too much. And so just like that, oh, I'm just gonna like sway here, or I'm just gonna rub my arms, right arm, left hand, right arm, left hand, right? And just rubbing your arms. And that can just like help thaw out that freeze a little bit. And also be comforting. Yeah. Awesome. So what do we do? How do we respond to these situations? There's a little bit of how we respond to ourselves that matters. And there's also like how we respond with others. And this is where, again, it's not about lowering the bar, but it is about leading with intention, care, and compassion. Because how we respond makes a huge difference. And we can all see this in kids. Anyone that has like had a toddler in their life can see that the way you respond to a toddler that is really upset can either throw them into a greater tailspin or help them calm down. I remember this happening with my daughter when she was 18 months old, and she came barging into the bathroom. I was brushing my teeth, one of those rare moments of peace and quiet to myself, and she, interrupted it, which was triggering in and of itself. And then she goes, "Mommy, I want your big box." And I was like, "What? No." She's talking about this caboodle I store my earrings in. I immediately started arguing with her. "You don't need my big box." And I saw her starting to melt down, and I saw what was coming, right? This was going to be full-on tantrum. And I realized the error of my ways, and I got down on one knee, and I put my hand behind her back, and I just asked a question. I said, "What do you mean, sweetie, you need my big box?" And she says, "I needed to play family." So before then, she was playing family with spoons. She had a small spoon for baby, a medium spoon for mama, and a ladle for papa. And now she was wanting to do that with boxes. And so when I could understand her needs, I could meet them. All right, I went into my nightstand and I grabbed this empty silver jewelry box for her. She was happy. I avoided the meltdown. We were all happy. So when we respond with intention, care, and compassion, I still could hold the boundary. I wasn't going to give her the thing that could, be dangerous for her. But I could also understand her needs better and meet them. And so when we respond, we want to be mindful of, are we responding in a way that is causing the release of more stress? Are we saying things like, "You really messed this up"? Are we arguing? "That was a poor choice. Don't let this happen again." These are common sayings that have been in the workplace. These are not like random. They came from real life examples of things that people said that kept us stuck in loops of the trigger reaction loop. And being mindful of shifting out of that reactive, thing that we're saying. So it's the words and it's the tone of voice, right? All of those things can make a difference. It's how it's being said. Is it being said like, looking at my phone? I don't know if you could see that. Looking at my phone, walking away, not listening. Or are you showing them that you care? So instead of, "You really messed this up," there's a mistake here. Let's take a look at what happened and how to learn from it. Really being, you can name the mistake. You can name that there is a problem, and you can bring in some curiosity. Or let's talk about what led to that choice and what you've learned. People, when we're delegating, when we're working with others, people make choices that we don't always agree with. And we might think, "Oh my gosh, that was so stupid. I can't believe you made that choice." Or, "Gosh, that was so obvious. How couldn't you know?" Right? Okay, so you have those thoughts. Let those thoughts be there. They don't have to be the way you respond, though, because then you're just reacting and you're keeping the loop going. But you can respond with intention and care. When an error happens, you can ask, "What could help prevent this next time?" Or, accuracy really matters here. What kind of support would be helpful? Right? There's all kinds of different ways that you can bring awareness in how you respond, and that care. And again, that curiosity as well is really powerful. And if you notice someone might not seem like they have what it takes to succeed, you can name the challenge. This seems like a challenge. How can we build your confidence or skills here? I worked with a team where there was conflict between a supervisor and her employee that was stressing everyone else out. And it was really overwhelming for them. And a big part of the stressors were the fact that the supervisor had been in the job for 20 years. So she had reached a level of unconscious competence, and her staff member was brand new. And so the supervisor kept thinking, if you have a question, you need to ask me. You're not asking for help, right? You need to actually ask when you don't know something. And the employee was like, but I don't. She was unconscious incompetence. She didn't know what she didn't know. She didn't know that she had a question to ask, because it wasn't until she started doing what was delegated to her that she started seeing holes in things. And so being able to create that awareness of like this big gap between unconscious incompetence and unconscious competence was a way that we could start to shift the dynamics of their conversations so that they both weren't making assumptions about the other that was leading to greater conflict and poorer performance. And so just that awareness, that shift of, hey, let's talk to each other. Let's say less of this. Let's downregulate the things that are causing the release of more stress hormones and upregulate the things that are causing a sense of connection and care and curiosity and allowing us to have the executive brain present. So I'd love to invite folks into this exercise to think about in your own experiences. Is there a word or a phrase or a reaction that you are seeing at work? Or at home, maybe it's easier there, where it's like, okay, we need to say this less or do this less, and we need to say more. This is how to rephrase it. And if you're like, I know what we need to stop saying, but I could use help figuring out how to shift it, you can put it in the chat or you can come off mute. Because I think we have time to do that. And I always joke that my role as a facilitator is to hold awkward pauses of silence. And I also like to say that sharing is an act of generosity. So if anyone is willing to share, that's very generous. Oh, Yvonne, you're muted.
There are a few in the chat. Do you want to read them or do you want me to?
Oh, okay. Cool. Let's see what we have. You're so bad at managing your calendar. Oh, talking to self, yeah. Instead say, you can build tactics to manage your calendar well. Yeah. Encouraging self-talk instead of the demoralizing. My toddler likes to dilly-daddle when we're late to something. My instinct is to say, hurry up. What's a better way to say that? Oh my gosh, David. Okay, my daughter's 12 now. So I still have to actually try to get her to hurry up sometimes. Wish I could say I didn't. But when she was a toddler, there are a few things. Every kid is different, right? So obviously hurry up is like, oh my gosh, you're stressing me out. Kids are playful, right? And so sometimes I would talk in a goofy voice. Sometimes I would make it a competition, or like, how fast do you think you can do this? How fast do you think you can put your shoes on? Do you think you can do that in under 30 seconds? So just like really making it playful or talking in a super goofy voice. One of the things that really worked well with my daughter, especially when, she'd be trailing behind me like 20 or 30 feet, and I'd be like, oh gosh, we need to go. I would kneel down and I would put out my arms and she'd come running towards me. And it like worked until she was like 7. Where anytime I would just want her to hurry, come be with me and not be lagging behind, I would just do that. So I think like try to be playful. Like you know your kid best. You know like what might be considered playful to them, or like and just experiment with it. And it's also important for yourself to recognize like you're stressed in that moment, right? Like if you're worried about running late, missing a meeting, or something like that, that's going to ratchet up your stress. And so giving yourself a pause, and it can just be a breath, right? And then choosing the response instead of the hurry up, like we're going to be late, and not just stressing the kid out and making it harder. So right now, this morning, my child's dealing with natural consequences of not having brought their computer to school for testing day. So we're going to see how that one lands when I pick her up. Um, and we reminded her. So like you try these things as parents, and then also the natural consequences is something that kids can have to deal with. Okay, see, we have some more comments. I have a mentor who frequently says, how can I support you in response to a situation I find challenging? It feels both supportive and like she believes my own abilities. Yeah, it helps transition me into more concrete problem solving. That's a beautiful example. That's something that I've coached other clients on as well, leaders that like to be fixers, find themselves becoming the fixer oftentimes, and needing to step out of that is asking a question like, how can I be supportive, instead of like, well, what you need to do, and finding they're caught in this fixing loop, the other person's not feeling trusted. It has always been this way. Robert, is that one that you see, you want to see a different way to respond to?
Yeah, it seems like, if something's been that way for 2 years and other people think it's been that way for like centuries, then what do you do with that?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's such a common, I see there's some laughter happening. That is so common. And so I think that first is just acknowledging, I realize this is the way that things have been done. And then going into curiosity again, like asking some questions. I'm curious why you think this is like, this way is working well right now. Or I'm curious what could be possible if we explored a different way of doing this. I think one of my go-to phrases, anyone that's worked with me knows, like, I'm curious is something I will say multiple times in an interaction. And part of it's to prime myself. Like, if I say out loud, I'm curious, then it kind of forces me to get curious. But that is a common response. I hear it all the time as well. This is the way we've always done it. Oh, I love the answer for the toddler. Show me if it's faster to hop or skip into the car right now. That's a great idea, Kelsey. Yeah, you can be so playful with this. Like, bringing play in with kids really shifts them in a powerful way. Awesome. These are some great examples and some questions. Any other questions? I appreciate folks sharing. It's definitely preferable to hear different personal experiences. And, as we are mindful of how we respond, are we saying or doing things that are, releasing more stress hormones, or saying or doing things that are, creating a sense of connection and trust and safety? We're also mindful to resist re-traumatizing. That's a big piece of it. And it's sad to say that workplace trauma is a thing. And people carry workplace trauma into new workplaces. It's something that I had to support a client through a few years ago. She had a really traumatizing experience in her last workplace and was really stuck in freeze. And she wasn't taking the initiative. And she had a great new boss that was so supportive and so encouraging and so caring. And she still couldn't get out of freeze. And that's why he brought me in to coach her, was because he recognized that, he was doing his best to create a culture of psychological safety. And she kept stopping herself from taking risks. And that's such a big part of the job she was hired for, was to swing big and to take initiative and try new things. And so we were able to work through some of those patterns that she had so she could show up in the culture that was safe, that was there. And a big part of psychological safety is the ability to be seen and be heard and be human, which is to make mistakes without fear of punishment or retaliation or, other things. And so this is the crux in so many organizations, is how we respond when someone makes a mistake makes a huge difference. I remember when I was managing a new executive director that I had just hired, and she had made a big mistake. And she called me on the phone and she was like, Ariana, I just made this big mistake. She was really nervous. And the voice in my head went, what the heck? How come you did that? I didn't respond that way, right? So that was like what I was thinking. And I had to pause. I took a deep breath and I said, you know what, Kathy? What's done is done. We can't change what happened. So we got to accept where we're at. This mistake was made. So what can I do to support you moving forward? How are we going to remedy this? Let's come up with a solution. And she told me years later that response, that one moment between us, made her feel so safe in the organization that it paved the way for her to take risks and to lead the organization effectively, which there were a lot of choice points she had to make throughout her time there that could have really been agonizing for her and hard to actually make the decision to support progress in the organization. And because she knew that she wasn't going to get punished or yelled at or, belittled or dismissed or whatever, she was willing to take those risks moving forward. So really that awareness of how are we responding when mistakes happen. And there is also the recognition that as humans, we're hardwired for connection. Right? We talked about the primitive brain and we talked about the executive brain, and it's the limbic system, which in my family we call the wolf pack brain. That's the part of our brain that's hardwired for connection and belonging. So the limbic system is constantly evaluating, do I fit in? Don't I fit in? Am I safe? Am I unsafe? Essentially, do I have my pack? When we don't feel like we have our pack, when we don't feel like someone has our back, that's when we get threatened. That's when we start to feel unsafe. And so what are we doing as leaders to foster connection? We can have the hard conversations. We can expect people to perform at a high level. We need to foster a sense of connection and safety for them to be able to do so. And when we don't, that's where performance starts to slip. So part of this is recognizing as humans, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to say something or do something that might upset someone, might make them feel unsafe. Or maybe as a leader, sometimes, there's decisions and conversations that we have to have that other younger professionals want to have a seat at the table. And then they get mad when they feel like they didn't get a seat at the table and there's this conversation or decision that impacts them and they didn't get to have a voice in it. And how we respond in that moment is to either continue the rupture or to repair. So there was that sense of rupture of you overlooked me or you excluded me. And there might be a legitimate reason for it. But if we respond with, well, that's just the way things are. You didn't earn your seat at the table yet. Or, these things just have to stay at the top level, is different than, I understand that made you feel excluded. I can see how you would feel that way. And, it's not my intention. Let me explain why these conversations are happening in this space in this way. And it just lets them know, like, hey, you have your feelings. They're valid feelings, and we have some protocols that we have to follow. Or, like, there's some legal requirements that we can't disclose certain information until it becomes public. Because that's very real in organizations and very real things that leaders have to deal with. But we really want to ensure that we have that safety, that sense of connection for honest conversations to be possible. So, a quick recap of what we've been talking about so far is to develop trauma literacy, right? Realizing trauma is widespread. It's something that affects the vast majority of humans. It's related to stress being in hyperdrive, stress reactions being in hyperdrive. And there are certain signs that we can look for that somebody is in that hyperdrive stress reaction. The fight, flight, freeze, or appease reactions. They become more and more obvious the more we train ourselves to notice them. And by participating with me today, we just told your reticular activating system, or RAS, it's this little pinky-sized part of your brain at the base here that's like a filtering system. And it filters out the vast majority of the information out there. It's why when we're driving we get a new Subaru Outback and we're like, everyone has Subaru Outbacks. No, everyone here had them before. I can tell you I have one. And I've almost gotten into somebody else's more than once because there's just so many gray ones out there. They were always there, but the RAS didn't filter that information in until we bought the car. So this training is telling your RAS, hey, here's some things to notice. Here's some signs that somebody's in a threat reaction that you can look out for. And now that the RAS knows this is information we want to filter in, you might start seeing things differently and seeing things that were always there, but you didn't know how to name before. And then we really want to respond with intention, with care, with compassion, and with curiosity. Because curiosity really brings the executive brain online. When there's curiosity, we can't answer with yes or no questions, right? We can't stay stuck in positional thinking. And then we want to resist re-traumatization. We want to create a culture of psychological safety and trust, where mistakes are handled in a respectful fashion, with care, and where we repair when rupture happens. So I want to invite any reflections or questions. Yeah, I see Leslie wrote, this is really important for marginalized groups. Yeah, for example, neurodivergent folks who struggle to feel they fit in on a daily basis, people of color, LGBTQ, etc. Yeah, it's really important. And it's one of the things, too, that I've found is, in an effort to create psychologically safe environments, some leaders have required disclosure from employees. And that is the opposite of what you do to create psychological safety. So in those kinds of situations where, it's like, well, we want to hear if you have a family member struggling or whatnot. That's something that's very personal and very private. And especially for marginalized groups, I spoke to a woman of color that worked in the building industry as an engineer. And she won't disclose personal information in workplace because when she was younger in her career, it was used against her. So when she disclosed she was a caregiver at one point for an elderly family member, she was passed up for promotion because they decided she couldn't do that because she was a caregiver. And so, like, those kinds of experiences of that can lead to that trauma of being experiencing bias or racism or choice points being taken away from you, um, can, you can't force disclosure, you can't force vulnerability among others. That's not creating psychological safety. That's actually doing the opposite. Other questions? There's so much more that I would have loved to share. I was really trying to keep it succinct, and I know we went over so much. So I'd love to hear any reflections you have. And would also just love to invite you to consider, like, what from this session will you experiment applying? What is just one thing? There was so much we covered. It could just simply be, I'm going to notice more. Like, I'm going to pay attention to what others are saying or how others are showing up or shifts in someone's demeanor, the way they're communicating, and I'm going to get curious. Or maybe there's a specific response you have in mind you want to bring. It also could be inviting the pause for yourself. If you notice yourself getting reactive in situations where you feel stressed, how might you invite the pause? It's a quote attributed to Viktor Frankl: is between stimuli and response there is a space, and in that space is our freedom to choose. And there's, I think, a little bit more to the quote, and I'm butchering it, but when you can invite that pause for yourself, it can really make a huge difference. Awesome. I see I'm going to pay attention to my reactions as much as others' reactions. Sometimes I think I place more observation on others and then I can't self-regulate as well. And invite the pause. Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. If there's a history of having to be hyper attuned to others, creating that habit of noticing what's coming up in your own body can be a little bit of work, because hyper attuning to others is a normal pattern for people to develop. Curiosity goes out the door for me when I'm stressed. I will be more intentional about curiosity. Yeah. It's a really beautiful awareness to have for yourself. I think I'm going to try to be more aware of situations and stay on top of my wording while talking to clients to create a better environment during the harder conversations. Yeah. Just inviting that awareness. I always like to say, treating life like you're an experimenter and this is just all data. You're a scientist, this is data. What are you going to just notice the data? Definitely will be paying more attention to reactions and responses from not only myself, but also members of the work group. Yeah. Just noticing. It's the first step. It's a super powerful first step to take. Yeah. Any other reflections? I want to mention too, there's a handout I can put in the chat for you all. It's a little worksheet that just has the 4 R's and then some other reflections that you can do, evaluating, where you see yourself or others, and the threat reactions and some of the psychological safety practices. And and then the say more to say less activity too that you can reflect on. Because again, like, you're gonna just start noticing things from being here today. Like, that's kind of what's really cool. I see another experiment is to look for local reaction to world events. Is that an experiment, Robert?
It's just something I hadn't considered before.
Yeah. Interesting. I think there's a lot of that happening for sure.
I was thinking too, I was going to type it, but it might take too long, so I can probably say it faster. Um, sometimes I guess I'm so focused on helping and supporting and being available to everyone that sometimes there are trauma responses from something I don't even know about that happened decades ago. I had no idea, and I can't control for that either. Do you know what I mean? I can respond to it, but that was, I don't know, new
For your
learning in my mix here. Yeah.
Yeah, for yourself, Yvonne, or for them, like a trauma response that you feel
Or
like
for
you.
them, yeah, for them. Like if they're having this response and I'm thinking I should be able to control the situation and maybe I did something wrong and we can change the environment or we can do something. And it's like, well, it might not be anything we're doing or anything like that. I don't know that it ever entered into my brain that it might be something different than that, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially if you've been like hyper focused on like, oh, I need to take responsibility for these things and I need to mitigate. And oftentimes I think that is one of those layers and nuances for a leader is like the overreactions tend to be more related to history than to the present moment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that awareness can really help like shift that sense of I did something wrong, which I know is my go-to, right? I'm a hyper internalizer. So I internalize responsibility. If there's someone that's upset about something, well, I made a mistake. I did something wrong, and being able to recognize like, oh, this is not actually about what I did. This is about whatever is happening for them. I don't have to mitigate their their experiences. I just have to be present, available, and kind and boundaried. But like, I don't need to try to, put myself into a pretzel because I can't. It's not my role. And that's like I think the chug struggle in the workplace too, right? We're not here to be anyone's therapists. So boundaries are really important. This isn't saying you should start therapizing people. It's about how we show up as humans and seeing each other's humanity. So, yeah, if there's other questions, feel free to come off mute or share in the chat. We have a few more minutes till noon. I do want to thank you for being here with me this morning. I know there's so many different ways that you could spend your time, and you chose to be here, and so I really appreciate it. I'd love to stay connected with you if you would like that. I have a newsletter that comes out bi-weekly called Challenge Accepted. That includes tips, leadership tips to stay kind, clear, and courageous when tested. So you might be able to see a theme in my work here. So if you're wanting more insights like we shared today, you can get them there. And then I also welcome your feedback. I imagine the chamber might also send out a feedback form too, so you can ignore that if the chamber has one. But it does always help me to know, what was helpful, what could be different or improved. I take all of that seriously. And
I think April had a chat. Are there resources for dealing with employees when using trauma-aware practices of leadership are not proving effective? What can we do when awareness, intentionality, and care don't seem to be enough?
Yeah, April, that's a real situation. And, I think that that's where really being clear and working with HR is super important around the expectations for the job. Um, and just having a really clear, direct conversation around these are the expectations for the job and these are the gaps that are being seen. And, asking that question of like, what can we do to support you in navigating that? And sometimes, in certain jobs, like the expectations and the capacity of the individual don't jive. And I don't know like what that looks like within your organization if there is a disconnect there. In some organizations it's harder to address that disconnect because it's harder to go through the process of letting someone go. And other organizations it can be easier. But that like really having that clear expectations conversation. Sometimes I've seen people self-select out once they start to realize too like there's a disconnect between the expectations of the job and their capacity, especially if they're dealing with some complex trauma. That I saw that happen in one workplace that I supported, where someone was like really struggling to perform in their job. They set out those expectations very clearly around the performance. She was really aware of her limitations, and they were able to reposition her into a role that fit her capacity and her strengths better, which the current role didn't. And that was a mutual choice that they made together. So sometimes, like, if you really can create that sense of safety enough so that they are not going to develop suddenly capacity that they don't have, but they can at least be repositioned somewhere else, that can also be a possible solution. But it really depends on the situation. So hopefully that was helpful for you, April. And if you want to reach out, I'm happy to connect privately as well. So also, I was going to say boundaries is another piece, April.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ariana. This has been a marvelous session. I actually didn't know I needed your session today, so I'm glad that I did join. It's amazing. We will send you out her slides as well as a recording of all of this. So to all of you who attended today. So, and then this resource will also be placed on our website. So if in the future you need the resources or you'd like to share it with someone else, then you can go right to the Chamber's website under our Tuesday Talent and share that along. So thank you for joining us, and our next one is next week, and I don't know what it's about, but next month. It's always the fourth Tuesday of the month. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.